You are listening to the Total Perspective Vortex. I'm Tragula,
I'm Christian.
and it is June 12th, 2020. As the show evolves and my technical prowess increases, we do have a meme for you. Meme appearing on the screen now. So this was one of the greatest hits uh, from the Donald subreddit.
Right.
Uh, it has Antifa right now hates Christopher Columbus, but settled on six blocks and claims it is theirs. Wants open borders, but erects a wall surrounding the borders of their country. Hates guns in the Second Amendment. Arms themselves with guns for protection. Hates police officers. Makes a police force. Hates New York City cops. Stops and frisks for weapons. Hates fascism. Appoints a warlord.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's a couple things I take issue, nitpicky. Like they didn't appoint a warlord. A warlord emerged, and all these other things too. Is like is what they're learning is that these are necessities. It's not
Right.
like, and then there's nuance to how you deal with the complexities that arise because of these necessities. Right.
Right. And this to me speaks to, let's flip the game board,
Mm.
but then they don't know what to do afterwards. Like they haven't thought about how, Western civilization, how it's built, why our institutions are so important. And
Yeah.
and this is we're just getting to witness this. Like this is it. This is a perfect example of their game board kind of just flipped. All the chips are all over the place, and now they're finding out that okay, this is why we built things a certain way.
Yeah, but they're not really because they're staying in the game board flipping mentality. That's key. But you can't build when you're in that mentality or mode, and you're not with people who cultivate that resentful spirit. If you want to go Christian with Christian here, the Cainite spirit versus like the Cain and Abel story. You they can't they're not in that build or create mode, and it's very easy to and you see this all the time it's very easy to make criticisms when you're not comparing it to any context, right? So when you're saying like, oh,
Right.
um like the police are violent, well, compared to what? Policing in the US is violent compared to what, right?
Maybe not
Or
compared to a
corrupt.
warlord.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
yeah, not
corrupt.
corrupt. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe not as corrupt
as a
uh,
warlord,
as a
right?
warlord. Yeah, just taking over the place.
Or hundreds, a couple hundred years ago, how bad was policing? 50 years ago, how bad was policing? So have we made any progress?
Right.
And it, but this actually like this gets to, um, like we say the flipping the game board, creating resentment. Uh, like we've talked about how I think like that's the criticism of the existing society, of the existing dogma of how we do things is important. It's part of how the system evolves, how you get through the iteration, and that works on an individual level and a societal level. Jordan Peterson used to have this thing where he talked about how we know when the right has gone too far. We have sort of an intuition about that, but we don't know how when the left has gone too far.
The left doesn't know when the left has gone too far. Is that what he's saying there, or that we don't know
As a
as a
society, we
side
don't know
really?
what the point to condemn the left when they're going too far, and that's a big question right now, right? Like the media is still covering when thousands of businesses have burnt down. 18 black people were shot in Chicago in the riots in one night. 18 in
Wow.
one night, and that's barely covered,
So
right?
that's 10 unarmed black people were killed. Was it in 2019?
Yeah. So yeah,
And Tucker Carlson did it beautifully. He went through them. It's like 50% of them are like, well, he was reaching for the police officer's gun and stuff
yeah.
like that. But
But it's so you put that in perspective of the numbers.
Right,
There's
exactly. Yeah,
700.
18 dead in one
No,
night.
no. Let's
In
do
one
that
city.
because we're
Oh,
not.
go ahead.
You're not. This is the numbers, right? So there's 765,000 police officers in the
Hmm.
United States right now. 765,000, and there are millions, or probably even tens of millions. I haven't looked up the statistic specifically, but of police public interactions
Right.
within those. Okay, so and 10 unarmed black people were killed by police in 2019. In one night of rioting in Chicago, 18
In
black
one
people
city.
in one city,
Yeah.
18 black people were shot and killed. So
Right.
and if you talk about, there was almost 100 people who were shot and injured that night, most of
Is
them
that
black.
right?
Yeah. So and if you look at and this gets to the idea of like we're not gonna solve these problems, like, we're talking about police brutality or these situations, or the problems faced by the black community, if we're diagnosing them wrong, and we're chronically diagnosing this whole idea of racism wrong. So we're not going to get to the solution. It's not the police that are the problem for the black community. It's not
Right.
systemic racism. Racism,
So,
sorry,
yeah, what is it? Yeah.
racism is just one form of tribalism,
Okay.
and it's not even the form of tribalism that's most oppressing the black community. It's just the forms of tribalism that are most oppressing the black community are along the lines of class tribalism and gang tribalism.
You want to, that's interesting. You want to flesh that out a little bit?
Well, I mean, and this is the reality, that most violence is intraracial, and it has been throughout history. Okay, so and most murders are committed by people who know each other, or even family members. So
Right.
so this idea that it's these external forces, that are oppressing people, it's the exception, not the rule. And even within the black community, like we talked about, there was 18 people who were shot. They weren't shot by police officers. They certainly weren't shot by white police officers. They weren't even shot by police officers. They were black people, largely shot by black men, mostly men with criminal records or gang affiliations. So we don't talk about gangism and the effects of gangism on the black community. That's what I'm talking about. The gang tribal loyalties, the tribalisms of gangs being more of an issue than the tribalism of race within the black community.
That's really interesting.
Right. So we have this lofty word that we've created, racism, and then we turn it into this bizarre academic abstraction and talk about systemic racism, and actually draw it away from its roots to something that's more useful as a means of accumulating power in academia and in politics. But
Right.
it, and
That's
one of
that's
and one of the
that,
reasons is its power is it's because it's a misdiagnosis of the
right.
issue. And that way, if we can pour all the money we want into these anti-racist groups, and the problems will never be solved. So the groups will never have a reason to not exist. And in fact, they will find even
Cause.
more problems, and they will become
Right.
even more powerful. And that's where we get into what we talked about before, the piracy or barbarism mentality, where they can extract tributes from organizations and institutions, and then come back later even more powerful to extract a larger tribute of
For the
jobs and money and institutional power.
and we're seeing that across all corporations. Like HR departments effectively seem like
Yeah,
those forms of departments. Like a
yeah,
lot of companies, I
yeah.
think it was Joe Rogan was saying that in Silicon Valley, he was talking to a lot of business owners over there, and they feel held hostage by their own companies, by the people that they've hired, and they're not sure what to do. So I
Yes.
don't know which entrepreneurs he was talking about, But
Oh, I've seen the phenomenon myself, and it is HR departments are holding companies hostage because of these ideologies, and then they're forcing these large companies to hire even more people who go in
right,
along with their ideology, because that increases their power and their ability to shake down the organizations. So
right.
it's a form of corruption. It's a form why this
Oh, of
ideology
course.
is so successful, right? So and it's an emergent property of these complex systems that any system any system of significant economic complexity, be it the trade of the intercontinental trade of goods by the British Empire, it's
Right.
you're gonna there's gonna be emergent specialists who then find ways to exploit that system and work within the cracks of it, right? And that's what you
Right.
have. So you have the pirates in pirates emerge as this powerful force in during the height of the British Empire. In Rome, you had the barbarian tribes. It was the same sort of phenomenon of people on the periphery who could exploit the complexity of the system and extract tribute.
I, I don't know if this is where we want to go necessarily, but on the issue of piracy, I don't know what you see the world history of that being, but I don't see necessarily. So from the history that I've read, I don't really see piracy as a real problem. It's just that you were right because you had permission from, say, the crown, whichever it was, and you were able to attack enemy ships. So like, let's say you were part of Britain, maybe you could attack Spain, and it's just that you did it. You were just a private citizen that attacked these ships. Like I don't see. I guess I don't mean that I don't see an issue with piracy. I don't see an issue in piracy over, say, a royal. So like
Well, I think that you maybe, and maybe I'm don't know the history here. We'd have to look into it more, but I think you may be overestimating the the number of pirates who had some sort of political sanction or so government sanction, because there were lots of pirates who were who formed communal contracts amongst themselves, and they didn't fly
right,
under any flag. So that,
right. But
but
that was
there were certainly pirates who were sanctioned by some governments to attack the ships of other governments. That definitely occurred, but there were also pirates who were just completely an emergent phenomena, and the government
I don't know
sanctioned
how
pirate.
true I don't know how true that is in terms of if it's more like Hollywood or not. Like I think that might have an impact, but I'm under the impression that the history of piracy is more yeah you get licensed like okay now you can go and attack ships and here are
No,
your rules.
the license was the licensing process was done because it was um, or existed because there were already pirates out there who were not licensed, right? Who there that was the cover so that they wouldn't go to war. Oh, it was just your ship just went down to pirates. Of course, we were paying those pirates, but there were other pirates that they hid amongst the mass of other pirates that were not being paid or sanctioned by a government. So you'd see more pirates like the farther away you got from society, right? But in this case, with institutions, like we see now, the specialists which attack within institutions too. And I think I'm having trouble coming up with a specific analogy at the moment, but I'm sure that this kind of phenomenon exists as well. So barbarians and pirates are some sort of external systems of corruption that exist on the periphery, but there's also internal systems of corruption that exist, because there's an
Right.
internal environment as well where you're going to have specialists who see the complexity in the system and find points where they can exploit. And to a certain level, like this kind of creative destruction is desirable, because if you're learning, it helps you it can potentially help you improve the efficiency of the system. But it can also become cancerous in this regard, where it becomes self-feeding, and destructive to the system as a whole. And I think that's where we are with this leftist ideology within corporations and institutions.
Well, if you were looking for an analogy, a hacker, I think would be a good analogy, whether external or even internal. That, you know, like we see this all the time with video games, where since they're pressured a lot, and I don't know what all the politics are within game studios, but just recently Naughty Dog,
Yeah,
which is a
Riot
video which is a
Games.
video game company, yeah,
Yeah, but it's the
but
same
their
sort of
whole code base got
HR
released.
department type issues here. But let's this is
Let's
let's bring it back to the whole tribalism thing, because this is
sure.
like, because they talk about racism, um, like it's just this one significant natural thing of like flaw of humanity, or it's not even a flaw of humanity. They say they make it a flaw of Western culture of capitalism. So that's what Black Lives Matters is really and it's just a way to tear down the complex system. Um, but racism is just one form of tribalism that exists. It's a mode of interacting that's fundamental to what humans are. Like, this is something chimps do too. Humans are not unique in this regard, and it can be very ugly. And there are right now uglier forms than racism. Like I said, like gang tribalism, gangism is a huge one and a huge problem. But we don't address that because we are so myopically focused on race. Another one, and this is the one why racism is so favored by the elites, is class tribalism, classism, which is another one that disproportionately affects blacks. And I think that most of the examples of what they call systemic racism is actually examples of classism or class tribalism. But if we started, we'd have to dig into that. First, they either come up with overtly socialist solutions for those problems,
All the time, of
and
course.
and they would be shot down, and like, these people would instantly react, oh my god, that is definitely communism. What you are suggesting now is definitely communism, right? There wouldn't be this sort of this camouflage that communism currently needs to exist in Western civilization.
Right.
But there's also the effect of, like, it would be much harder for the rich to ideologically signal their loyalty to the cause. Like, their hypocrisy would be abundant, right? Like,
Right.
like, because they may have black friends and invite black people to their cocktail party, but they're not inviting, Jamal from the hood, right? Or so it's harder for them to perpetuate that, to maintain that illusion that they are part of the solution without having to make significant changes or sacrifices to their lives. Like, they want to draw this boundary here where they can make, like, all those conservatives are the bad guys, externalize it that way, as opposed to drawing it on class, and then, well, then how are we not the bad guys here?
I, when I think of someone that I disagree with, I try. I don't always succeed, obviously, but I try to place myself in their shoes, and I have a really hard time closing, like, why. Do you understand the psychology of why their minds are so closed, and why, like 50% of the population is conservative, roughly speaking, or they're right wing, let's say, and then maybe like 30% of the population is conservative. Like, if we're being a little more careful with language, but it means that conservatives are all over the place, and there's a lot in New York and so on, but maybe a little less. But the fact that they can say this is the enemy, and they don't, it's like the saying goes, like, it's not that people don't like conservatism, like leftists, it's that they don't know what conservatism is. I've gone through this with a lot of people where they're like, oh, I guess maybe not, they're not full-fledged conservatives, but they have a conservative bend, but they didn't know how to identify that. It was just more of a, like an itch or something. Like when certain things are discussed, they're like, I don't know how I feel about that, but they've never voiced it or never articulated it. So you have like this group of people that make up, let's say, like racism. I don't want to say that racism is completely made up, but there are, like you're mentioning, there's
I'm not
much
saying it's made
greater
up.
issues.
I'm
No,
saying it's, well, I'm
right.
saying that they
But
turned it into something it's not. I'm just making it clear because because people, if
right,
this
right. That's
ever
one of
gets a
those
big
things.
podcast, like people are gonna say,
Yeah.
like Tragula thinks that racism is made
Is
up. It's
made
like
up.
I think that the racism that's just discussed in in those gender study courses and in intersectionality is an
Right.
absurd creation that suits their
Right.
purposes. I think that there is a phenomenon that's racism that's accurately described as one form of tribalism, and it is not the form of tribalism that is most doing the most damage to society currently.
All right. So, and I'm just I'm almost done here.
Yeah.
So they make up an enemy. They make up a they make up, or at the very least drastically inflate and distort a problem, and then they vote for the right quote unquote policies. They're leftist friends and so on.
Yeah.
They vote for them because that's the right thing. I just can't get into that mindset of like, this is
Well,
a whole
here's something
fictional
that's going to blow
reality.
your mind, maybe or not. But this is the mindset is that compassion systems, the people who are more compassionate, are fundamentally more tribal in their thinking, because it's,
Okay, you have to unpack that. Yeah.
well, it gets it people who are more wisdom based and more law following are less tribal because they're more rule
Okay.
oriented.
Right. Okay.
So that's what you're, and this is the facts bear this out, but it goes against what we're taught in school. But the right is fundamentally less bigoted than the left.
I
Be,
from personal experience, I agree, but conceptually, why do you say that?
why? Well, it's because compassion and the rule of the mob, like we were talking, how it works on
Right.
a small scale, but not on a large scale. Like a mob is just is just like a family taken to a dysfunctional size of level of complexity. It's gotten this a dysfunctional scale, right? So
Right.
compassion systems work very good in very small groups where you can identify each individual's needs and compensate for each other very well. So in order to create a small group, though, like a family, and this is where because the left is the compassion thing. Compassion systems work very well in raising children and nurturing, right?
Right.
So if you think of it from that guard, in order to create a nurturing environment, or that, you necessarily have to create borders from the outside. You have to create an in group that protects from the outer environment. So you have to have insiders who you trust, who you let near the children, and outsiders and aliens you need to keep out. Alien
Right.
forces. So you need to create that sort of shelter, that hearth, right? So that's a compassion based mentality where you're sheltering the weak, or the ones you're caring for, from the harshness of the outside world. So
So
that creates the concept of othering, right?
the concept of othering. So just the way that you're framing it there, my instinct is to say this sounds like a very traditionally female
Yeah,
mode of operating, right?
yeah,
Because there's Peterson talks about this, and I won't do it justice, but the where yes, you have your children, the outside world are filled with snakes or whatever it is, the mythological in the
Yeah.
mythological sense, and and then you need to kind of do that protection. So if you choose your, and this would make sense because there's always this idea that when you see them, when you see leftists operating and they pick a chosen group to defend, necessarily, not necessarily, but you see often that they start infantilizing that
Yes.
group.
Yes.
They take away their moral agency.
Yes.
They do whatever, which is
They take responsibility for them. The white, like the white
right,
man's burden type thing, you'll see a lot right now with Black Lives Matter, where
right,
like there's this whole video of celebrities saying, "I take responsibility for all of racism for black people," right? And there's like a whole list of them, and it's the same idea as a mother taking responsibility for their children,
right,
right? Because
right,
it's like
right.
I created this environment that that has caused these children to misbehave, and
And children, in a certain sense, don't have the moral. They're still learning morality, so it makes sense to say that they
ideally
don't
they're
have
learning morality.
ideally they're learning morality. Millennials, it's debatable. They still they still
Yeah.
have to maybe go through that process, but that's not entirely fair. I hate broad strokes and stuff, but yes, but
See.
it's a generation that struggles with morality for sure. Um, I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, I finally get you back.
uh,
But
yeah,
what because
going back.
to bring it back to the main question, there is like you were asking, um, what were you asking? I'm
So
bringing it back.
originally I was asking how do you get into that mindset? If I'm trying to
Yes,
understand the leftist
the,
mind, it feels so foreign to
they're
me.
try so they're trying to cultivate a tribalism because they think tribal they have more of an inclination to think tribally. But you're not bereft of compassion, no matter how much of a cold-hearted, calculating conservative you are.
Right.
And you also are susceptible to tribal thinking, and
Of course.
they're trying to form a tribe along a certain line that's useful to them. And I'm also going to say, like, nationalism is also a form of tribal thinking. It's another form of tribalism, and I think that it's comparatively a benign one. And I think that we should actually have that
Mm.
conversation about where do we want to form a tribe? Do we want to form our tribes along racial ways? Do you want to have a form of? Do you want to form our tribes along gangs, or do you want to form our tribes along nations? Because tribalism is not something we're escaping. It's part of the human heart, and if we and fundamental to the way we think, and we have to figure out what is the most productive way for us to draw our tribal lines.
Well, we're getting close to wrapping up. Then maybe we just finish on this. So so being a conservative and being maybe like you're saying, I don't escape tribalism, and I'm aware of that, and I'll
But it,
often make
yeah,
jokes about myself.
okay,
But if the difference between say like I I'll just state it this way. I think at a national tribalism has real utility in protecting individuals. So if I think, say, the West maybe more broadly, but I guess we're from Canada, so. But if I think Canada, uh, let's say like immigration, I don't want. I want those strong borders. I want some control over. I want intelligent immigration because I don't want people who fundamentally disagree with, say, there's such thing as truth, or I mean, we already have some of those things, but that universal rights, that everyone, regardless of race or religion, that we should all have these rights. There is, to me, there is a very real external threat that's sometimes not recognized by the left. So I see that so the tribalism that we're discussing seems from the left seems very dysfunctional, and they're trying to extrapolate out from
Yeah.
a small something that works on a very micro scale. They're trying to extrapolate it out to the macro scale. So that seems like dysfunctional kind of
Yes.
tribalism. Whereas like at the national level, for me, that's a clear that it's not an entirely clear case, but it's a much more clear case on useful tribalism.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like that there is a case for, well, even in your family, I think that there's a case for useful tribalism. I don't think you disagree with that, and I don't think most conservatives would disagree about having clear boundaries about
Right.
who's in your home, who's part of your house and your immediate family, and who is not.
Right. I'm extremely tribal when it comes to my place.
Yeah.
I let very few people in.
Yeah.
Like, even the delivery person gets a bit of a a slight crack. And who are you?
Yeah.
These are my borders.
Yeah. But to get back to that question of like why are they more tribal? I think I was trying to draw that, and this is the utility of Karens too. Is Karens utility of Karens
Okay.
because they do
that
play a functional role in society.
Way. This is where we end. I need clarification on
the utility of Karens. Karens
that whole statement.
are tribal gatekeepers. They're tribal rule enforcers. So where you would actually sort of see them as a different, like the police enforce the rule of law.
They enforce social rules.
They enforce social rules and tribalism, right?
Okay.
So that's why what they're going around and policing is that they see like this social order.
I think maybe we disagree on the definition of a Karen a little bit, because the Karen is the one that yells at the who will go to the restaurant, and I think you might have made this or given me this example.
And
she goes to the restaurant. Yeah, exactly. Just so that she can be dissatisfied, just so she can yell at the manager.
No, I don't think it. I think she's the one who's quick to yell at the manager about the fact that she's dissatisfied, and she's quick to put the manager in his social place. And this is, I think that we can take an example because I ran Hirsi Ali talked about the Karens in Islam in her book Infidel. Of course she didn't use the word Karen. This book was written over a decade ago, but she made the point that most of the rules of Islam were not enforced by the men. Like it was the women, right? Like it was if you didn't wear you didn't wear a headscarf, the men wouldn't be the first ones to come after you. It would be the Karens, and you'd see that the social conformity would be most implemented by the women who are living in this patriarchal society. So they'd sort of there'd be like she talked about the sort of like bizarre situation where it was the women who were forcing their own oppression.
Right.
But I think that it's fundamental that the people who are most governed by compassion are going to be the ones who are enforcing the social rules, because they're the most tribalist.
Well, Tracula, I love talking with you as always. I think we're running out of time here. It's probably a good place to put a pin in it, wrap it up for now. But like I said, it's always fun talking to you. I look forward to chatting with you again next week.
All right. Take care, Christian.
Take care. Cheers.